At Nedbank CIB, we see money for the difference it can make.
Hello, welcome to this special CNBC Africa interview with Nigeria's Honorable Minister of Power, Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola. Thank you for joining us. I am Wole Famurewa. It promises to be an interesting look into Nigeria's power sector challenges and other infrastructure issues. Indeed, he is fondly called the Minister of Infrastructure in Nigeria. Honorable Minister, thank you so much for your time today. Several big issues that I would really like us to get through, but the biggest perhaps is the power sector. And it's a sector that many studies have suggested that Nigeria is really underperforming. Many have suggested that we should be generating as much as 100,000 megawatts of power, but as you know, we are closer to 4,000 megawatts at this time. Can you just speak to, first of all, the recent improvements that we have seen in power, and just give us a sense of what the government is doing to try and fix that sector?
Well, I think it's undebatable that in a world that is driven by industrialization and technology, automation, to be competitive and to be efficient, clearly that economy needs energy, and therefore it's a big issue, it's a big ticket item for the Nigerian government. It has been for some while, but I think that we are matching the size of the commitment with our own response in the way that budgets to deal with completing outstanding projects are now being addressed. We are also reorganizing institutional organizations, TCN, NERC, all of the regulatory agencies that we now have responsibility to deal with the interface of government with private sector, because over 60% of the power sector really is now in the hands of the private sector. It's a transition from government to private that is a little just over 3 years. After 60 years of government-owned and government-run power, results will take some time to show. But from what we are seeing, completion of the transmission stations, as you say, 4,000 megawatt of power without the 3,000 megawatt that is out due to sabotage. We have ramped up essentially to 7,000, which is the reality today, and we continue to do that through our strategy of incremental power, hopefully to take us to stable power, and of course, uninterrupted power.
We'll certainly get to many of the constraints and the challenges, but can you speak first of all to the World Bank loan, which we've heard of? There is a loan that is going to be a special intervention into Nigeria's power sector. Can you speak to where we are with that transaction with the World Bank?
I think you simplify it when you call it a loan. It's actually beyond a loan. It's a support program that has funding components to the extent that Nigeria and our government recognize that the privatization is in transition. It needs support. It needs reform. There were some errors in the process, and they need to be corrected without jeopardizing the fundamental intent of keeping a substantial part of the power sector in private hands. So in the last 1 year that I have been here with members of our team and the Minister of State, we're working with Ministry of Finance, working with Ministry of Petroleum, working with the Central Bank. We've done a root and branch analysis of what needs to be done, and we have come up with programs, policies, decisions that need to be taken. So at the same time, the World Bank was having an external view of what was happening in here. And when we met with them and presented what we wanted to do, then they said, look, this was even much more extensive than what they think they were going to recommend to us to do. And that essentially interest in the power sector is still very hot and very keen, and that through the private sector arm, the IFC, and the World Bank Group, the public sector arm, they could put together a package to support us through those reforms, and also provide financial support where it was needed. So financing will go, some of it directly to the discos to help them in metering and reducing their losses. Some will go to extending access to power through rural electrification, for example. Some of them will help in refinancing some of the debt that is challenging industry. But clearly, nothing is coming free. They're going to come with conditions, performance measures, KPIs, and a time frame for everybody to get commercial, competitive, and efficient. So it's not going to be a transition forever.
But will the government be guaranteeing some of these facilities?
The government side of it that would involve us would require, once you're dealing with World Bank especially, they usually seek some sovereign assurances. And if we say that power is defining, this is where government should put its foot forward.
Right. Okay, so we'll see how that progresses. Earlier you mentioned errors in the privatization process, and I just want you to reflect on that. As you've gotten to work now, you've come to appreciate the big issues in Nigeria's power sector. Many operators in the sector are very unhappy about how it's working today. But as you look back, what would you say are the critical errors that you have noticed in the process of privatizing Nigeria's power sector, and what are we doing to fix these issues?
Well, as I've said on occasion, and I will repeat myself, hindsight is always 20/20. It's not likely that if I undertook the process myself, it would be bereft of errors. But there were some things that were fundamental that needed to have been done. One was to have done an audit of the customer base, because that's where the money was supposed to come from. Those were the people who were supposed to receive the service. And without a clear data of what the consumer base was, a survey of what they were willing to pay for power, I think it was a business that was flawed from the beginning. So that has to happen very quickly, because that's where you now define who pays what, and it affects collection and loss reduction.
Right. You've just mentioned the discos, and to a large extent, many operators say that that is a critical piece that needs to be fixed. How do we fix the capitalization issues in the discos? We've seen, for instance, the central bank provide some intervention funding to the sector. Yeah. Many are suggesting that you are simply, that's an inefficient process, because you are throwing money into challenged companies.
If people enter into a business environment on certain assumptions, including exchange rate, and that exchange rate suddenly heads in a direction that it becomes difficult to manage it, it throws the spanner into their whole business plans. And to that extent, a sizable part of the liquidity problem is a financing problem rather than an engineering or technical problem that is the responsibility of power. At what exchange rate are these people going to do business? Because when they got a new tariff, all of the values and the benefits of that tariff was wiped out by the exchange rate differential. And if you are indexing the currency, if you are indexing the input gas in dollars and then converting to naira where they collect, which is losing value, who bears all of those costs? So at some time, as I've said to my colleague in the central bank, that you need to reset the economic clock.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, look, if we undertook a transaction at under 200 naira to $1, and that transaction is now running at 400 to $1, and I'm not sure where it's going to end and where it's going tomorrow, somebody needs to recalibrate that clock for us and say, this is how we will be doing business. For example, you find that with the hydros, they have obligations to government in dollars. Now, at the time they signed on these obligations with government that controls the monetary policy, the exchange rate was 165. And they are going to replace and acquire those dollars at 400 and something. Clearly, if you really want power, government must step in, either through the CBN or through the Ministry of Finance or through the use of government sovereign authority somewhere. Because the losses to the economy in terms of GDP, social costs, by power outages are much more than the cash that we are actually talking about. And therefore, before we gain a few pennies and lose a pound, we need to really see that if our balance sheet as government must be the prosperity and the well-being of our people, rather than how much we save in naira and kobo and dollars on power accounting.
Right. So what I hear you saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you require the central bank to stabilize the exchange rate so that
it will be helpful, extremely helpful, not only to the power sector, but to the entire economy.
Indeed.
And I must say that we are seeing signs heading back in the place that we used to be.
Right. But one thing that is clear is that the exchange rate has certainly moved. And because of that, there are very strong calls for the liberalization of the pricing of the electricity tariff and the gas tariff. I want to get your reaction on this.
Tariffs, of course, are the price for those services. And they come with consequences, and government must be sensible to ensure that the politics and the policies match. So something that needs to, but people must just understand, and I remain very forceful in sharing with people that, look, the reality now is that we must pay for what we use. And it will take us ultimately to conservation, because when the thing has a value, we manage it more efficiently. We've come from a culture of essentially free and uncharged power, but again, we need to balance the interest of the consumer with the interest of the investor and stand somewhere sensibly in the middle where the economics can make sense.
But these tariffs, correct me if I'm wrong, they are stipulated by government agencies. So if the government agencies are controlling the tariffs, then they should move the tariffs if they want the private sector to.
I think you also need to understand government agencies like NEC,
yes,
which approves the tariff, doesn't propose the tariffs. Tariffs are proposed by the operators, the discos, because the tariff from disco to disco is not exactly the same amount. So what the regulator tries to achieve is a band within which everybody begins to operate. And therefore, I think it is important in continuing to educate people that it is not NEC that proposes tariff. It is the business operators who propose the tariff. And then NEC stands between the operators and the consumer and says, this is too high, this is too low, this is the middle band.
Well, is that the same for gas? Is that the same situation in the gas space?
The gas market is slightly different in the sense that it operates on a global market pricing. And therefore, if the input for producing power has a global price, we can't unilaterally change that price, but we can change some things about the local content cost, which we may choose to price in naira. And these are some of the things at the top of our mind and our thinking as we go into this phase of the management of the privatization. How to make it easier for the operators, how to make it more convenient for the consumers and the Nigerian people, and how to make electricity accessible and affordable to everybody who can pay a reasonable and a fair market price for it.
But when I speak to many operators, they say that the lack of quick movement on many of these issues is putting the entire power sector in a situation that I remember speaking to one investor recently saying that it's a walking corpse, that the power sector is not working in Nigeria. It needs to be fixed urgently. And I just want you to react to that comment from an investor today.
Look, I see the facts. I have toured quite a substantial number of the power assets. I know their conditions. I have met with quite a number of the current operators. I know firsthand the levels of their commitment. And I think that it is an undertaking that will work. and it needs some time. Don't forget, again, that government is now not the operator. 60% of the industry is in private hands, and therefore they are challenged to respond to make it work. Our duty is to provide the enabling environment to make that happen through regulation, policy support, and so on and so forth. And I've shared with you some of the things we see in terms of how to stabilize the liquidity issues so that they feel comfortable. But whether each Genco, gas company, distributor actually makes it or not, it's a question of the business models they choose. These are individual decisions by each company, how they compete in the market, what ethical practices they run their company by, and so on and so forth.
But let's take the example of the Gencos, for instance. Right now, many of them are owed billions of naira through the bulk trader operation, NBET, and historically, that number has continued to climb. I'm hearing that the number is well over 100 billion.
You see, you can say bulk trader. The bulk trader was an idea to ensure that there was no default in the system. That was government trying to provide support.
Right.
Government could have walked out of the system from day one, and had government done that, which one of them could have exchanged contracts at the beginning and guarantee payment on the market? So NBET tried to raise a bond, if you remember. The people of Nigeria, through their parliamentarians in the House of the Nigerian people, said, no, stop. Perhaps if that bond had been raised, it may have helped to mitigate the situation. And people must understand, every day, today, the bill for electricity will come nationwide. So it's a continuing daily accrual of liabilities. And unless you put a mechanism in place to ensure that those accruals do not go into arrears, then the sector will remain continuously challenged. And investors who perhaps see that and see that it is difficult to recover may take the extreme opinions that the person you said you were talking to took. And, you know, I don't believe in extreme opinions. I don't believe in dramatic conclusions. I believe in reality. If the power sector has worked in every part of the world, why should it not work here? If we are ready to do what they have done in other parts of the world. One of the things they've done in other parts of the world is people's contracts are enforced against them. People's obligations to pay are enforced against them, and they are disconnected if they don't pay. Those are the things, if we want to see those kind of results, those are the pathways we must walk.
Right. Before I move away from the power sector, I just want you to comment on the calls for more autonomy in the way some states are running their own, if you like, local power industry. Lagos State, for instance, recently, which of course you were governor at, is proposing a system where they would provide power to the state exclusively. As much as 3,000 megawatts is the target that they have set. But I understand that they would need a lot of support from the likes of NERC for this to move forward. How do you react to this?
I welcome the initiative by the state government, as I have encouraged other state governments. One of the first things I did as minister was to write to governors to encourage them to set up energy or power ministries wherever they could, if the costs were affordable, and where they couldn't, to have energy advisors, because I wanted to see states playing, because now that the sector has been privatized, the reality is that the states are the regulators of the utilities. Beyond states, I'm encouraging people who are building estates, where you have 200, 300, 400 residents. Apply for your own power license. I will assist you to get it. If your disco can supply you. So our role is essentially now regulatory. NERC is not created to help people. NERC is created to perform a public function, which is to support, regulate, and enable the industry work, to sanction those who stand in the way of efficiency in the industry, and so on. So if people wanted, and as I said to people, don't apply to me for power, for approval to generate electricity. I don't have such powers anymore. Apply to NERC. copy me. But if your application is unduly delayed, then I can look in next shop and say, why is this not happening?
Quick final comment on this issue around the initiatives of the likes of Lagos State. I think one of the concerns that many would have, and I want you to react to this, is that if they were to make those investments, would NERC allow them to, for instance, price that power as they would? Would they allow them to invest in transmission?
Now, again, there are things that people must understand. We've talked about tariff being a policy and political issue and how to find the right balance.
Yes.
Governments have paid attention to these kind of issues, but they're only to some limit. And therefore, government sets a public tariff. The current public tariff is in the region of about 24, 28 naira across different discos.
Depending on where it is.
Now, if MBET is the one that is going to be the bulk buyer of that initiative, MBET is going to find a tariff within that range. But if the private power producer has found a CNBC that wants to buy the power, MBEC has no business. License them. So long as there's a willing buyer, willing seller, that's what we want to see.
All right.
Who is ready to pay a premium over and above public tariff, but that will certainly be still less than 68 naira per kilowatt hour, which is the cost of self-generation with diesel today.
Right. So as long as that condition is met,
once they can,
they're
happy. That's what we did when I was governor. Because we were paying a premium over the public power. But we were getting more efficient power. We were getting electricity at 99% efficiency. So we decommissioned our diesel, we decommissioned our generators, and when we did the math and the efficiency, we were saving 40%. But you can't impose that premium on the public.
what if the public is willing to pay?
That's why I use the word, once they are willing to pay, it's no longer an imposition. Do you get it?
Sure.
So our role is to stand between government and between the service providers and the consumers. And that's why you will also see in the telecom sector, anytime rates, tariffs, promotions are going on, NCC intervenes between the service providers, and that's our role now.
All right.
Acting through NERC, and of course with us in the ministry, keeping a clear focus of what is going on across the entire value chain.
Okay. I want us to move now to works and the roads projects that, of course, you are trying to complete. I know this government inherited so many uncompleted projects. It's been a tough task to finish many of them, I imagine. Give us an update on how that is going, and to what extent are you seeing private sector willingness to get invested in federal roads, for instance, and would you be allowing them to, for instance, toll those roads? What's the government's policy on that?
Okay.
Maybe the update first.
What's this update? Update yesterday was 3-4 years contractors were not paid, and that is consistent with the budget we made up till 2015 as a country. 15% capital expenditure. So if you budget 15% capital expenditure, how do you complete your projects when you don't even now fund that 15%? So what has changed with this administration? For the first time, some contractors who haven't been paid in 2-3 years are getting paid for the first time when the president signed the 2016 budget. So we're moving contractors out, and I can say what has changed is that those who lost their jobs during the layoff as a result of non-payment to contractors are being recalled back. So some economic activity is beginning to manifest, and that is why this budget of 2017, the president boldly calls the budget of recovery. In terms of appetite for private roads, yes, we have received some inquiries, but when it gets to the bolts and nuts of actuals, we begin to hear things like, oh, the traffic count is not good enough. Government has to guarantee the traffic count. In that sense, then it's not a business again. any business that the government has to guarantee traffic count. So the appetite is still not there. There are challenges also in terms of the procurement process, the approvals. We're trying to reform all the laws and make concessioning easier to achieve. We have very, very useful collaboration with the National Assembly on that. We are on the same page, executive and legislative. We also need to collaborate with the judicial arm, because we see also in other sectors that there are few judicial interventions in terms of court cases, agitations by communities, which stifle the enthusiasm of entrepreneurs in terms of community disputes, injunctions against projects, which are not consistent with global best practice. We're trying to change all of that. I know what my experience as governor at subnational level was when we introduced a toll, in spite of the fact that we met the minimum compliance of providing an alternative route. Investors would have taken their cue from that, and I still believe that the appetite is healthy. It is our own attitudes that must change. Even in social and almost communist China, there are toll plazas on highways everywhere. So again, we must move away from the mentality of free roads.
Right. A final question, still related to the roads. We know there's the imminent closure of the Abuja airport for repairs, and the road from Abuja to Kaduna is one that I imagine people will be very concerned about. I know there have been some repairs. What can you tell us about the state of that road?
Well, let me say again very clearly that this government will deliver on its commitment to finish that runway project within the time of 6 weeks. We have demonstrated our commitment to keep our promise by how quickly we have dealt with the road rehabilitation program. And people should just understand also that the road is not the only choice to get to Kaduna. There's also a rail service, and there are also some aviation companies are offering airlift shuttles through choppers. It was a call that needed to be made in the ultimate interest of safety of lives, and we are determined to ensure that it takes us the exact time we promised and reduce the inconvenience to people as much as we can possibly achieve that.
Honourable Minister, thank you so much for your time today. I've been speaking to the Honourable Minister of Power, Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola. He's been delving into the big issues around Nigeria's power sector, and of course, in closing, we also spoke about some of the road projects in the country, and that's the end of this special interview with Nigeria's Infrastructure Minister. Thank you very much.
At Nedbank CIB, we see money for the difference it can make.